It all started with a pair of sunglasses. I was running late for a meeting and couldn't find mine, so I grabbed Rachel's from the glove compartment of her car. She always kept a spare pair there, right next to the hand sanitizer and loose change. When I opened it, though, something else caught my eye. A folded piece of paper with a phone number scrawled on it. No name, just a heart doodled in the corner. My first instinct? Laugh it off. Rachel's a teacher. Maybe it was from a student or a parent who got a little too friendly during parent-teacher night. It had to be something innocent, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. The one that made me shove the paper into my pocket instead of leaving it where I found it. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that I just forgot about the stupid note and went on with my day. But by the time I got home that evening, something had shifted. Rachel was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and her phone. She didn't even notice me come in, her face lit by the glow of her screen, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "Hey," I said, leaning down to kiss her. She turned her face slightly, and my lips caught her cheek. "Hey, how was work?" I straightened up, trying to shake the weird vibe. "Fine. You? Busy?" she said, locking her phone and setting it on the coffee table. Too quick. Too deliberate. I wanted to ask about the note right then and there, but something in me hesitated. I felt like a kid about to peek under the bed for monsters, terrified of what I might find. So I didn't. Instead, I made dinner while Rachel disappeared into the bathroom for nearly an hour. When she finally emerged, she said she was exhausted and headed to bed early. That night I couldn't sleep. The paper in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. At around 2 a.m., I crept downstairs to the kitchen and unfolded it again, staring at the heart like it was mocking me. The next morning, Rachel was gone before I woke up, leaving a sticky note on the counter. Gone to the gym. Back by 9. She hadn't been to the gym in months. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicion. Her gym bag, the one she'd packed the night before, was still sitting in the corner of the closet. By now, my brain was in overdrive. Who was she meeting? What was she hiding? Was I being insane? Or was there really something going on? I decided I needed answers. So, I did something I'd never done before. I grabbed her phone while she was in the shower that evening. The passcode was the same as always, her birthday. My heart was racing as I opened her messages, scrolling past the usual ones from her sister and a group chat with her friends. Then, I saw it. A conversation with someone saved as T. It wasn't just the messages themselves, it was the way she talked to him. Flirty, playful, completely different from the way she talked to me. She'd sent him a picture of herself in the bathroom mirror, wearing the same top she'd worn on our last date night. "Miss me yet?" she'd written. I sat there in stunned silence, my hands shaking as I read message after message. He called her babe. She told him she couldn't wait to see him again. The timestamp on one of the messages was from the day she told me she was stuck in traffic after work. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was this real? Was I imagining things? Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there, but another part of me needed more. I needed the full picture before I could make my move. That's when I decided to follow her. The next morning, Rachel was chirpy, uncharacteristically so. She hummed while making coffee, threw on her favorite red sweater, and even kissed me goodbye before heading out the door. Her scent lingered, sweet and floral, as if she'd gone the extra mile with her perfume. I already knew her plans weren't as innocent as she'd made them out to be. Just running errands was the excuse, but I'd seen enough to know better. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I waited exactly 20 minutes after she left before grabbing my keys. My heart pounded as I got into the car and started the engine. It felt like something out of a movie. The unsuspecting husband trailing his wife, each turn heightening the tension. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had a sick feeling I was about to find it. She didn't go to the grocery store like she'd said. Instead, she drove across town, weaving through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. I kept my distance, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe, one we'd never been to together. Rachel parked, glanced at herself in the rearview mirror, and touched up her lipstick before stepping out of the car. I watched as she walked to an outdoor table, where a man was already waiting. He stood to greet her, and my stomach dropped. He was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, tall, and dressed like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Rachel hugged him, lingering just a second too long, then sat across from him, her body leaning forward like he was the only person in the world. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language said it all. She laughed at something he said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. He reached across the table to touch her hand, and she didn't pull away. I sat there in stunned disbelief, every muscle in my body screaming for me to march over and confront them. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures through the windshield. Proof. I needed proof. After about an hour, they got up to leave. Rachel walked to her car, and I watched as the man placed a hand on her lower back, guiding her like they'd done it 1,000 times before. They didn't kiss, not in public at least, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. I followed her again, this time back to our side of town. She didn't come home, though. She stopped at a small boutique, spent about 20 minutes inside, and came out with a shopping bag. Probably another lie she'd spin when I asked her about her day later. When she finally did come home that evening, she was glowing. "Hey, you're back late," I said, pretending to be casual. "Yeah," she replied, setting her shopping bag on the counter. The grocery store was packed. Took forever to get through the line. I stared at her, wondering how she could lie to my face so effortlessly. "Anything interesting happened today?" "Nope," she said, popping open a can of sparkling water. "Pretty boring, actually." My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "That's funny. I thought I saw you over at that little cafe on Willow." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh yeah, I stopped there for coffee." "Why?" "With someone." She froze, the question hanging in the air like a knife. Her eyes darted to the shopping bag, then back to me. "Just a friend from work. We were going over some project stuff." "What's with the interrogation, Jake?" "A friend," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And does this friend know you're married? Because it didn't look like you were exactly keeping it professional." Her face flushed, and for a moment I thought she'd crack. But then she straightened her shoulders and glared at me. "You were following me? Are you serious right now? That's insane, Jake. Do you even hear yourself?" "You want insane?" I snapped, pulling out my phone and shoving it in her face. The pictures I'd taken at the cafe filled the screen. "Explain this, Rachel. Go ahead. Explain it to me." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. But it wasn't fear of losing me, it was fear of being caught. She wasn't sorry. She was panicking. "That's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my voice rising. She opened her mouth to answer but shut it again, her jaw tightening. Instead of giving me an explanation, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, trembling with rage, knowing the truth was out in the open but still waiting for her to admit it. Rachel didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. She locked herself in the guest room, and the house felt heavier with her silence. I stayed up, pacing the living room, replaying her reaction over and over in my head. The deflection, the anger, it wasn't guilt. It was pure arrogance. Around midnight, I heard her footsteps upstairs. I crept to the bottom of the staircase and watched as she slipped out of the guest room, phone in hand, walking as quietly as she could into our bedroom. Curious, I followed, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. I peeked around the corner and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, whispering into her phone. "I told you he's being ridiculous," she said, her voice low but sharp. "No, he doesn't know anything for sure. He's just, I don't know, paranoid or something." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't even trying to spin it anymore. She was talking to him, her little cafe partner. I stepped into the room, my shadow stretching across the floor. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice cold. Rachel whipped around, her eyes wide. For a split second, she looked like a kid caught stealing candy. Then, just as quickly, she narrowed her eyes and put on that defiant mask again. "Are you seriously spying on me now? Answer the question, Rachel." "It's no one," she snapped, shoving her phone into her pocket. I walked over and held out my hand. "Give me the phone." She stood up, gripping the device so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You're out of control, Jake. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like a crazy person." "Crazy? You've been lying to my face for God knows how long. Sneaking around with whoever the hell he is, and I'm the crazy one." My voice cracked under the weight of everything I'd been holding in. "You don't even have the decency to admit it, Rachel. Just own up to it." For a moment I thought she would. Her lips parted, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. But then, she crossed her arms and sneered. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You want the truth, Jake? Here it is. I'm bored. I'm sick of this mundane, predictable life we've built. You're so obsessed with being the perfect husband that you've become boring. And you know what? T makes me feel alive. He makes me feel wanted." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. My stomach churned as I stared at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my entire life around. "Alive," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've destroyed everything we have because you were bored? Don't act like this is all on me," she fired back, stepping closer. "You're the one who let us get to this point. Maybe if you paid more attention, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her words hit like bricks, but the absurdity of them made my anger flare. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for your affair? Call it what you want," she said with a shrug, her tone dismissive. "I'm not apologizing for wanting more than this. More than this." The phrase echoed in my mind as she stormed past me, shoving her phone into her pocket again. I followed her into the hallway, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and desperation. "Rachel, stop. Don't walk away from me." She spun around, her expression cold. "What do you want me to say, Jake? That I'm sorry? I'm not. You've always been too predictable, too safe. I deserve better." "Better?" I said, my voice rising. "You think he's better? Some guy who sneaks around with a married woman? That's who you're throwing everything away for?" Rachel didn't respond. She just stared at me, her lips pressed into a tight line, as if daring me to say more. And then, in the middle of our silent standoff, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. She glanced down, hesitated, then pulled it out. I lunged forward, grabbing it before she could stop me. "Jake, don't." But it was too late. I unlocked the phone and opened her messages. The latest one was from T. "Can't wait to see you again. Tonight was perfect. When can you sneak out?" My chest tightened as I read the words, my hand trembling with rage. I looked up at Rachel, who was staring at me with a mixture of anger and panic. "Sneak out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You were with him today?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed the phone from my hand and turned away. "Rachel," I said, my voice shaking, "don't you dare walk away from this." But she didn't stop. She disappeared down the stairs, slamming the door behind her, leaving me standing there in the dark, my entire world unraveling around me. The next morning, Rachel was gone. No note, no text. Her car wasn't in the driveway. She just vanished, leaving me alone in the aftermath of our fight. The house was too quiet, the air thick with the kind of tension that clings to every corner. I sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, replaying every word she'd said the night before. "T makes me feel alive." That phrase echoed in my mind like a taunt, each syllable dripping with betrayal. How had it come to this? By noon, I was done waiting. I grabbed my laptop and started digging. If Rachel wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. It didn't take long to uncover more than I wanted to see. I started with her credit card statements. Rachel had never been one to hide her spending, but now the pieces started to fit. Charges from restaurants I'd never heard of, jewelry stores, a hotel across town. She hadn't even tried to cover her tracks. Then I checked her emails. She'd left her laptop on the dining room table, and her inbox was still open. There, among the newsletters and work memos, were emails from him, T. He wasn't even using a fake name. His full name was plastered right there in the sender's address. Tom Henson. The emails were casual but intimate. "Last night was amazing. I can still smell your perfume on my shirt. Don't forget about our weekend plans." I booked the room. Same place as last time. The room. My stomach churned. They'd been meeting at that hotel. The timeline matched perfectly with the nights she'd claimed to be working late or out with the girls. I felt a sickening mix of rage and humiliation boiling inside me. I wanted to punch something, to throw her laptop across the room, but I couldn't let myself lose control. I needed to stay focused. I needed a plan. I kept scrolling through the emails, my anger mounting with every word. Then, I found one that made my blood run cold. I told him it was a work trip, so I'm good for the whole weekend. Can't wait to be with you. The date on the email was last month. That weekend, Rachel had supposedly been at a teachers' conference in Chicago. She'd even brought back a mug with "Chicago Loves Teachers" printed on it. I closed the laptop and stared at the mug sitting on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my fingers brushing over the cheap lettering. It wasn't just the affair. It was the ease with which she'd lied to me. The effort she'd put into maintaining this charade while I sat at home with the kids, trusting her without question. That's when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I froze, gripping the mug like it was some kind of lifeline. The front door opened, and there she was, Rachel, looking as composed as ever, a bag of groceries in her hand like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "What's with the look? You okay?" I didn't answer. I just held up the mug. She frowned, confused. "What about it?" "Chicago," I said, my voice low and steady. "The conference." Her face didn't change. She was good at this, too good. "What about it?" I set the mug down with a loud clink. "You weren't in Chicago, Rachel. You were at a hotel with him, Tom." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to catch it. Then she crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Were you snooping through my stuff? Seriously, Jake? That's pathetic. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me." I snapped, my voice rising. "I've seen the emails, Rachel. I've seen the charges on the credit card. Stop lying." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable. You're acting like some detective in a bad TV drama. Do you even hear yourself?" "I hear myself just fine," I said, stepping closer. "What I don't understand is how you can stand there and act like this is my fault. How long? Rachel? How long have you been doing this behind my back?" She rolled her eyes, her face a mask of annoyance. "Does it even matter? You've already made up your mind about me, so why should I bother explaining myself?" "Because I deserve the truth," I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you, for us, I deserve at least that." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "Fine. You want the truth? It's been a year. Happy now. A year." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "A year," I repeated, my voice barely audible. "While I was here, taking care of the kids, working my ass off to give us a good life, you were—" "Don't act like some martyr," she interrupted, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think being a good provider makes you a good husband? You were never there, Jake. You were so busy trying to be perfect that you forgot about me. Tom didn't." I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to process the person standing in front of me. This wasn't the Rachel I'd married. This was someone else entirely. Someone who didn't care about the destruction she'd left in her wake. She brushed past me, grabbing her groceries and heading for the fridge. "I'm done with this conversation," she said over her shoulder. "You can stay and sulk, or you can grow up and move on. Your choice." For the first time in my life, I was truly speechless. Rachel's words replayed in my head as she moved around the kitchen, unpacking groceries like we'd just had a minor disagreement about what to watch on TV. Her indifference was suffocating. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't care. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I grabbed the bag of groceries she'd set on the counter and slammed it down hard enough that the contents spilled out. A carton of milk burst, pooling onto the countertop. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, turning to me with her hands on her hips. "Am I serious?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You've been lying to me for a year, cheating on me with some guy who probably doesn't even know how to spell commitment, and you think I'm the one being unreasonable? Rachel, I don't even know who you are anymore." She rolled her eyes, leaning back against the fridge with an exasperated sigh. "Oh, please, spare me the dramatic speech, Jake. You've been playing the perfect husband card for so long that you've convinced yourself you're some kind of victim here. Newsflash, you're not perfect. Not even close." Her tone was venomous, each word carefully chosen to cut deep. But what she said next sent a chill down my spine. "Tom knows me better than you ever did," she said, smirking like she just delivered some kind of punchline. "He actually listens to me, Jake. He doesn't treat me like a box you check off at the end of the day." I felt something snap inside me. "You want to talk about being treated like a box? How about the lies? The sneaking around? You couldn't even respect me enough to end things before you started screwing around." Her smirk faltered for just a second before she fired back. "End things? Why would I? This is easier. I get what I want, and you get to keep pretending your little fantasy life is still intact. Sounds like a win-win to me." "A win-win," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "You've destroyed everything we've built, Rachel. Our marriage, our trust, our family, and for what? Some cheap thrill." "Stop being so dramatic," she said, waving me off like I was an inconvenience. "It's not the end of the world. People cheat all the time. It's not that big of a deal. Not that big of a deal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity, the complete lack of remorse, the way she stood there, acting like she was untouchable. It made my blood boil. "You think this is normal?" I said, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone who thought we were a real family. And for what? To feel alive? Do you even care what this is doing to us?" She stared at me, her eyes cold. "Maybe I don't," she said flatly. The words hit like a slap to the face. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She didn't even flinch. "Unbelievable," I muttered, stepping away from her. My mind raced, torn between the urge to scream and the overwhelming need to leave the room before I said something I'd regret. Rachel didn't move. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me like I was the one falling apart. Like she was the one in control. And that's when I realized she didn't care about fixing this. She didn't care about the damage she'd caused. She cared about herself and only herself. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me in my tracks. "You know," she said, her tone casual, almost bored, "Tom and I were planning to tell you eventually. I was just waiting for the right time." I spun around, my fists clenched at my sides. "The right time? Are you kidding me? When, Rachel? After our next anniversary? After I've wasted another year of my life with you?" Her expression didn't change. "Whenever it felt right." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You are unbelievable. You think you can just string me along until you're ready to move on? That's not how this works, Rachel. You don't get to make that choice for me." "Well, you didn't exactly give me a choice either, did you?" she shot back, her voice rising. "You made this marriage all about you, your career, your goals, your perfect little life plan. I was just supposed to fall in line and be grateful, wasn't I?" I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "You want out, Rachel? Fine. But don't you dare stand there and blame me for your mistakes. Don't you dare act like this is my fault." Her smirk returned, colder than ever. "You've already made up your mind about me, haven't you? So go ahead, Jake. Play the victim. But deep down, you know I'm right." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and stormed out the door, slamming it behind me. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside me. As I stood on the porch, breathing heavily, one thing became clear. There was no coming back from this. Rachel had made her choice, and now, I had to make mine. I spent the night in my car, parked at the edge of a quiet park just a few miles from the house. The cold seeped into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside me. I stared at my phone, scrolling through pictures of happier times. Our wedding day, birthdays, holidays, they all felt like lies now, just a series of staged moments hiding the cracks that had been forming for years. The worst part? I wasn't sure when I'd lost her. Maybe it had been gradual, like sand slipping through my fingers, or maybe I'd just been too blind to notice the moment she stopped loving me, if she ever really had. When dawn broke, I went home, bracing myself for round two. I walked in to find Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked calm, like she'd had a full night of sleep and was ready to move on. "You didn't come home," she said, her tone flat. "I needed space," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged. "Fair enough. But we can't keep doing this. It's exhausting. Exhausting." That's how she described the wreckage of our marriage. I stared at her, half expecting some sign of regret, some sliver of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But there was nothing, just a cold detachment that made my skin crawl. "I want a divorce," I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. Rachel raised an eyebrow like I just suggested we order pizza for dinner. "Okay," she said simply. I blinked, caught off guard by her lack of reaction. "That's it? No fight? No discussion? Nothing? What do you want me to say, Jake?" she replied, leaning back in her chair. "You've already made up your mind. I'm not going to beg you to stay if you don't want to." Her indifference was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just that she cheated, it was that she didn't care. She didn't care about me, about the life we'd built, about the family we were supposed to be. "I'll talk to a lawyer," I said, my voice hollow. "We'll figure out the details later." She nodded like we were discussing a business deal. "Fine, just make it quick. I don't want this to drag on." Her casual tone sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. "You really are unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" "Don't start, Jake," she snapped, her calm facade cracking for the first time. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted it to end like this? Didn't you?" I shot back. "You've been lying to me for a year, Rachel. A whole year. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. So don't stand there and act like this is hard for you. You made your choice." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But then she smirked, that cold, infuriating smirk that made my blood boil. "You're right," she said. "I did make my choice. And you know what? I don't regret it. At least Tom knows how to make me happy. At least he knows how to treat me like I matter." The words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. "I hope he's worth it," I said, my voice tight. "Because once this is over, you're on your own. Don't come crawling back when he gets bored or decides you're not worth the trouble." Rachel's smirk didn't falter. "Don't worry about me, Jake. I'll be fine. I always am." I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with memories of a life that no longer existed. I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. How had it come to this? Could I have done something differently? Was there a version of our story where we didn't end up here? But deep down, I knew the truth. Rachel had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. There was no saving this. There was no going back. I pulled into the parking lot of a diner and sat in the car for a while, staring at the neon sign flickering above the door. It wasn't until my phone buzzed that I snapped out of my daze. It was a text from Rachel. My unfaithful wife came back happily from a date with her lover, but she was struck with horror when she saw it wasn't a message meant for me. She'd accidentally sent it to my number instead of his. I stared at the screen, the words twisting the knife that was already lodged in my chest. A mistake, a slip-up, but it was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a joke to her, a game. And now, I was done playing that. I sat in my car, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. Rachel's message, so brazen, so detached, stared back at me like a cruel taunt. My unfaithful wife had just handed me a weapon, one she didn't even realize she'd given. My unfaithful wife came back happily from a date with her lover, but she was struck with horror when she saw the horror was about to become real. I wasn't going to let her brush this off anymore. No more smirks, no more indifference, no more gaslighting me into thinking this was somehow my fault. She wanted to play games? Fine. But this time I wasn't going to play nice. I texted her back. "Come home now." The message was read almost instantly. No reply. I could picture her reaction, probably freezing for a second, then scrambling to figure out what she'd done. I didn't care. I drove straight home, my mind sharp and focused. By the time I got back, Rachel's car was already in the driveway. She was standing in the kitchen, pacing nervously, her phone clutched in her hand. When she saw me walk through the door, her face twisted into something between panic and defiance. "Jake," she started. But I held up my hand to cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice low but steady. "Don't even try." Her mouth snapped shut, and for a moment, she just stared at me, her usual confidence slipping. "You sent me a text," I said, holding up my phone. "Care to explain this little masterpiece?" Rachel's eyes darted to the screen, her face paling. "It was a joke," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Something stupid I was writing for a friend. It wasn't about you, Jake. You're blowing this out of proportion." I laughed bitterly. "A joke? That's the best you've got? Rachel, do you even hear yourself?" She crossed her arms, her panic giving way to defensiveness. "What do you want me to say, Jake? That I screwed up? Fine, I screwed up. But this text doesn't change anything. You already made it clear you want a divorce. So why are we even having this conversation? Because this isn't just about a divorce," I said, my voice rising. "This is about the fact that you've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone who thought we were a real family. This is about you thinking you can walk all over me and not face any consequences." Her eyes narrowed. "And what are you going to do, Jake? Huh? Air our dirty laundry to everyone we know? Go ahead. Play the victim. See if I care." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away from this like nothing happened? You think you can destroy everything we've built and not have to answer for it?" Rachel smirked again, but this time it was strained. "Answer to who? You? Don't make me laugh, Jake. You're not some hero in a revenge story. You're just a sad little man who couldn't keep his wife happy." The words stung, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of her and Tom at the cafe. I held it up so she could see. Her smirk disappeared instantly. "You think I don't have proof?" I said, my voice sharp. "You think I'm just going to roll over and let you rewrite the narrative? Guess again, Rachel." She lunged for the phone, but I stepped back, keeping it out of her reach. "Jake, stop this," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't need to do this. Think about the kids." "The kids?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Now you care about the kids? Where was that concern when you were sneaking around with Tom?" She froze, her face crumpling into something I couldn't quite place. Fear, regret, anger. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then make me understand." I shot back. "Tell me why. Why throw away everything we've built? Why him? Why now?" For a moment I thought she might actually answer. Her lips parted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But then she shook her head, her expression hardening. "Because I wanted to," she said simply. "Because I could. And you know what? I don't regret it." Her words knocked the air out of me, but I didn't let her see it. I stared at her, realizing that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same woman I'd fallen in love with. She was a stranger, someone who didn't care about the wreckage she'd left behind. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "If that's how you feel, then we're done. But don't think for a second that you're walking away clean. You want to play games, Rachel? Let's see how you handle the fallout." Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't stop moving until I was back in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline coursing through me was like a fire that refused to burn out. Rachel's words replayed in my head on a vicious loop. Because I wanted to. Because I could. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. I wasn't the type to air dirty laundry, but Rachel had forced my hand. She thought she could rewrite history, paint herself as the victim, and leave me in the dust. I wasn't going to let that happen. If she wanted to tear everything apart, I'd make sure she felt every splinter. The first call I made was to a divorce lawyer, a shark, the kind of attorney who didn't care about playing nice. After a brief conversation, he assured me that Rachel's affair and financial dishonesty would work heavily in my favor, especially if I had proof. And I did. The photos, the emails, the credit card charges. It was all there, a mountain of evidence that left no room for doubt. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who promised to draft the paperwork immediately. The next step was harder. The kids, our 2 boys, Ethan and Caleb, were staying with my parents for the weekend, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing back home. My heart sank at the thought of them being caught in the crossfire, but I couldn't shield them from the truth forever. I drove to my parents' house and sat in the driveway for a long moment, trying to gather my thoughts. When I finally went inside, my mom took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Jake," she said, her voice full of concern. "What happened?" I hesitated, but there was no point in sugarcoating it. "Rachel's been cheating," I said flatly. "For over a year." The room fell silent. My dad, who rarely showed much emotion, looked up from his newspaper with a furrowed brow. My mom covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Jake," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm filing for divorce. I wanted you to hear it from me before things start getting messy." "Have you told the boys?" my dad asked, his voice steady but serious. "Not yet," I admitted. "I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it. They're going to have questions. Questions I don't have answers to yet." My mom nodded, wiping her eyes. "We'll help however we can, Jake. You're not alone in this." Hearing that gave me a sliver of comfort, but it didn't ease the weight pressing down on my chest. The next morning, I returned home to find Rachel in the living room, her suitcase packed and sitting by the door. She looked up when I walked in, her expression cold but composed. "I'm staying with a friend for a while," she said, her voice clipped. "Tom?" I asked, not bothering to hide the venom in my tone. She rolled her eyes. "It doesn't matter. I'll be back to get the rest of my stuff later." "Good," I said, "because I've already started the divorce process." Her face flickered with something. Shock, maybe, or fear, but she quickly masked it with indifference. "Of course you have. That's so like you, Jake. Always rushing to control everything. You lost the right to criticize me the moment you decided to blow up our family," I snapped. "Don't forget that." She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door without so much as a glance back. When she was gone, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to process everything that had just happened. I thought I'd feel relief, but all I felt was a hollow ache. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out. I'd wanted a happy home, a strong partnership, a family that stayed together. Rachel had stolen that from me, and no amount of paperwork or revenge could give it back. But as the days passed, I began to see the cracks in Rachel's armor. Mutual friends started reaching out, asking if the rumors were true. I didn't lie. I told them everything, and soon word spread like wildfire. Rachel's carefully curated image, the devoted wife, the doting mother, crumbled under the weight of her own actions. Even Tom, her so-called escape, didn't stick around for long. A mutual acquaintance told me he'd broken things off when he realized just how messy her life had become. The satisfaction I felt was brief. Rachel's downfall didn't undo the damage she'd caused, but it gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. In the end, I realized something important. Rachel's betrayal wasn't a reflection of me or my worth. It was a reflection of her. She'd chosen lies and selfishness over love and commitment, and that was her burden to carry, not mine. As I tucked Ethan and Caleb into bed one night, listening to their quiet laughter, I made a promise to myself and to them. I'd rebuild not just for my sake but for theirs. We didn't need Rachel to be a family. We just needed each other. And that was enough.